So we should be live now. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is the one of the first side events of the C20 Summit happening today, the 6th and the 7th of October, at the end of which it will be revealed the C20 Summit declaration. I'm going to this is one of the side events, as we were saying. So we have 25 events during these 3 days. I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Matteo Vespa. I'm a member of the Executive Committee of the European Students' Union, representing almost 20 million students in the European continent through our 45 national unions in 40 countries. And I'm going to be the moderator of this panel. You can also send us questions. You can use the function in the chat, and we are going to read them and also address them to our speakers. Before jumping into the discussion, let's have a little bit of introduction. This year, 2021, is almost the second year now of the pandemic, of the COVID-19 pandemic, but it's also 20 years since the Geneva G8 summit. During that summit, the police repression was defined by Amnesty International as the biggest suspension of human rights in a democratic country since World War II. But the ideas that were in those streets in Geneva in 2001, the ideas of the social forums were the right ones. The neoliberal globalization that was happening at the time led us to the great financial crisis. And now, almost 10 years later than the crisis and 20 years later than that G8 summit, we have still many of unsolved problems that come from that time. The financial crisis has led the G20 summit to become the main intergovernmental global arena outside the international organizations. The G20 covers more than 80% of the world GDP, 75% of global trade, and 60% of the population of the planet. But the impact of the decisions at the G20 go beyond the participating countries. And that is why the Civil 20, which is one of the engagement groups of the G20, is open to civil society organizations from all over the world, regardless whether the country is part or not of the G20. This year, 550 civil society organizations and networks participated in its activities. The challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, the heightened inter-country and inter-country inequalities, the vaccine justice, the need for global ecological transition made us, the student organizations from all over the world, decide to engage for the first time in the C20. And thanks also to the work of the Student Caucus, the C20 Policy Pack has called for massive investments at the global level on education to avoid massive dropouts, to strengthen human rights and academic freedom, to promote transformative education combining social, environmental, and economic sustainability, and to promote gender equality and women's and girls' empowerment in and through education. The G20 Ministers of Education rightly have pointed out to issues like digital divide and educational poverty. Yet they haven't asked for massive investment in education. And we need them. We need the G20 to lead a new deal for education that should push all the countries to invest in education, especially those low and middle income countries whose citizens are among the most at risk of permanent dropout due to the pandemic, but whose public finances are crushed by foreign debt. If we're going to talk about global citizenship, we need also to talk global rights. Global rights are human rights, and education, quality of education, from kindergarten to higher education, is a global right, and we need to ensure that. We're going to discuss this with our panelists. So I'll give the time to the technical part to arrange the setting. And now I'm going to introduce our panelists. We have Zamzam Ibrahim, Vice President of the European Students' Union. We have Amilka Sanatan, steering committee member of the Global Student Forum. We have Samuel Sasu Adon Tank, programs coordinator on tertiary education at the All Africa Student Union. And we have Bianca Borges dos Santos from the Global Student Forum, steering committee members, but also member of the executive secretariat of the OCLAE, the organization representing Caribbean and Latin American students. So let's get directly to the question. The first question is directly to Samuel. Now, Samuel, COVID-19 has hit hard all the communities all over the world. In most regions of the world, there is the risk of a permanent dropout from education due to the pandemic. So how are student unions and students in general mobilizing to help their communities in Africa, in your constituency?
Hello, Matteo, and thank you so much for the opportunity to join this amazing panel. And I would want to first try to bring our warm greetings from the All Africa Student Union to all persons listening on this call. So I would want to start by saying that in the state of the COVID-19 pandemic, I mean, we've all come to understand the deepening inequalities that have existed in our education system. So in the state of the COVID-19 pandemic, what the All Africa Student Union tried to do was to organize a series of education room meetings with all of our member unions. And in doing that, we came to understand the issues that were happening in the various countries with respect to how education, the state of education in our member countries. And one thing that I would say was remarkable to have noted was that the COVID-19 pandemic really sort of brought student unions closer to the decision-making table. For instance, a particular example would have been the case of the National Union of Ghana Students, where the union was clearly engaged in the president's that His Excellency Dr. Father's situation room meetings in Ghana, so that they were able to bring to the fore issues that were confronting students. So some of the things, initiatives that were undertaken included providing free internet data bundles to students while they are at home, and also providing of PPE to some students, and even for students that were less privileged, they tried to also provide some food and stuff to them. Now, one key thing that we were also able to do in the state of the COVID-19 pandemic was especially the 50% fee reduction campaign, which was mostly successful in Quebec, where the government, once the student union stood up and requested of the government, they were able to slash higher education fees by 50%. Just to be able to ease the burden on parents and then also their families as well, to ensure that at least education is not cut for most students. And another thing that I would also want to indicate was that the All Africa Student Union, as you may already be aware, Matteo, was also became a member of the Global Education Coalition, the UNESCO COVID-19 Global Education Coalition. And through that, we were able to also launch the Gilbert School campaign, with we've been working with youth activists, the 100 Million campaign, and the UNESCO and other student unions across the continent on, which has been quite very successful, especially in Uganda and in Kenya, in trying to support the female child's education. So just to ensure that I'm able to stay within my time, I think I'll leave it at that. If there are any follow-up questions, I'll be glad to answer them as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samuel. We have our also Kalel from the UBS, the Brazilian School Student Unity, joining us. So you're going to see us freeze for 1 second. And also Kalel Naveca has joined us. He's from the União Brasileira de Estudantes Secundaristas, the school student union from Brazil. And Bianca Borges is going to be the interpreter for us when for therefore the question towards him. Now, let's turn to Zamzam. Now, the European higher education area is probably globally the main example of thorough stakeholder and student involvement in the educational policy-making field at the continental level. Can you tell us more about the European higher education area and what is the role that ESU plays in it?
Yep, sure. Of course. So, as Matteo introduced me, the Vice President of the European Students' Union, and as ESU heads towards its 40th anniversary, I think ESU's played a pivotal part in actually the Bologna process. The key elements of the European higher education area, as it envisioned when it was first coined, was for the European countries who had different political and cultural academic traditions to engage and cooperate in a shared objective. European students and graduates, and the concept behind it was for European students and graduates to be able to move easily from one country to another with full recognition of their qualifications and periods of study, and have access to the European labour market. As well as this, European higher education institutions will be able to cooperate and exchange students and staff on a basis of trust and confidence, and also transparency and quality. And so European governments fit and through the work of the European higher education area has found itself working and initially reforming its education sector into the European context, and increasing its international competitiveness, and changing its cooperation within regions, and slightly wider than that. And ESU's played a pivotal part in it. Just I guess a glimpse into the current work plan from 2021 to 2024. ESU is on multiple working groups. It's on the working group for monitoring the implementation of the Bologna process, on the working group of fundamental values. ESU is a co-chair of the working group on social dimension. We're on the working group of learning and teaching coordination group, and we're on the coordination group for global policy dialogue, and on the task force for enhancing knowledge sharing in the EHA community implementation. And therefore, we play a pivotal role in the implementation of what student-centered learning looks like, and ensuring the student voice is a key golden thread that falls through all of the work that happens in that arena. And the context of that is some of the work that we do on the Bologna with Student Eyes, and the publication that we publish on from our members, which includes an understanding of social dimension, quality assurance, recognition, internationalization of ability, structural reforms, financing higher education, student-centered learning, and that's a document that can be found on our website, with further information of what the student experience looks like across Europe, and that plays a pivotal part in feeding into the work and the representation that we do on the European higher education area. So I'm going to leave it there, keep it brief. Thank you, Matteo.
Thank you very much, Zamzam. Now a question to Kallel. In the organization, in the international organization, there is the talk is about the role of learners in society. Yet, in this kind of fora, the organized university and post-secondary students tend to have the most voices in these spaces. So, from your perspective, what is the importance of political participation at the level of the schools, so school student unions?
Caleb, pode apresentar a resposta, por favor. Eu vou traduzir em seguida.
Kallel, ¿nos entiendes?
Caleb, a primeira pergunta agora.
I think maybe Kallel has having technical problems. We are going to come back to the question later. I would like to ask Amilcar about the so basically I don't know maybe if Kallel can speak. ¿Puedes hablar? Okay, so we let Kallel answer and then we go to Camilo. Sorry, Amilcar.
Bianca, você tá aí?
Sim, pode falar e eu traduzo em seguida.
Dá para fazer uma apresentação inicial?
Não, é a primeira pergunta.
Ah, sim. Deixa eu pegar aqui. Rapidinho. Bom dia, né? Primeiramente, a todo mundo. Saudar o espaço, acho muito importante essa discussão a respeito dos estudantes e tudo mais. E quando os estudantes têm voz ativa dentro das instituições educacionais, é muito importante que através das entidades representativas, como o Diretório Central dos Estudantes, os centros acadêmicos e os grêmios estudantis, que essas entidades sejam organizadas, né, dentro das universidades, das escolas, e assim os estudantes conseguem propor ações mais concretas para o avanço educacional dessas instituições. E é importante também que as organizações sempre tenham apoio, né, e que trabalhem juntos com as direções das escolas e universidades. Com o fortalecimento das entidades e voz dos estudantes, todos tendem a ganhar, com a democracia interna avançando em diálogo e projetos. Acho que é isso, Bianca.
First of all, good morning. Kalel said, I'll make the interpretation here. He thanked for the opportunity to be here with you guys. And he said that students have an active voice within educational institutions through representative bodies such as Central Directory of Students, academic centers, and student unions. With entities organized within universities and schools, students are able to propose more concrete actions for the educational advancement of the institutions. It is important that organizations always have support and that they work together with the school and university boards. With the strengthening of entities and the voice of students, everyone tends to gain from internal democracy, advancing in dialogue and projects.
Okay, thank you very much, Kalel. Turning to Amilcar. So we have heard about the role that students are having in mitigating the pandemic and helping their communities in Africa. We talked about the importance of the involvement of university and school student unions in the governance of the academic institutions, and we also took the example of the European higher education area as an example of involvement at the continental level of students in policy making process. Now, this leads to us to the obvious question on do we need a general global democratic representation for students at the global level, or better, do we need this global representation to be recognized by international institutions? What are the actions that the Global Student Forum is doing on this regard?
Thank you very much, Matteo. And to answer the question categorically, it is yes. Of course, we need a global student forum, not necessarily the GSF as the only institution, but the idea that global decision-making bodies must have democratic and legitimate structures to represent them. We still operate in a moment where there has been an embrace of youth stakeholders, youth ambassadors, but there seems to be a type of hesitancy to the democratic youth and student constituents who would play a very important and transformative role. So to answer it quickly, one of the things the GSF have been advancing is the idea of student mainstreaming, that we need to see students as part of education planning, administration, and leadership. And we need to get involved in that. And that is a conceptual framework which some organizations embrace, but unfortunately, not many. And then we need to see ourselves, I think, strategically as allies for the youth and students as a constituency. And I think this is best represented by All Africa Students Union understands the complementarity of that struggles, but yet are very clear on the distinctions. You don't take a youth to represent a student and just because you're a student leader doesn't mean you are youth. So we are very clear that as a political group, we work together as comrades. But at the same time, we are very distinct constituencies. And to do that, it helps us nuance the idea of what a learner is. Learners are very important because it is an all-encompassing term for those who are in the formal and informal sectors of education. But in many ways, it has been deployed to depoliticize our political identity and role within the education structure of students. So those are points we like to register. But there's a set of homework the GSF actually takes up. Yes, we have the regional platforms, OCLAI, CSA, SU, ASU. But there's also an important role in underdeveloped regions, like the one that I come from in the Caribbean, in terms of the structures that exist. And I want you all to imagine, in the English-speaking Caribbean, there are 3 national student organizations in 2 territories of the 15 Caribbean community member states. And that is why a global student forum would play a transformative role in making sure that we could bring the quality of resources, the technical know-how, but more importantly, the know-why to student governance in areas where there are forms of student governance, but maybe not on the scale to take part in larger regional and global dialogues. So as I close on this point, I'd really like to support what the colleague Samuel said, that COVID-19 has shown us an opportunity where we could strengthen the relationships to the structure. But the I see is a kind of paradox. On one level, there's a mass exclusion of students because of COVID-19 and a disruption in it. But on another level, in terms of the leadership structures, there has been a coalescing of the forces because we understand the need for a global response. And I do hope that this moment has shown us that we cannot fight education alone. And what may appear to be on a local scale was fundamentally a global issue. But the global is animated by those local realities.
Thank you, Milka. Also, because this leads us to our second topic of the day, which is the global citizenship. And the idea of the Global Student Forum, I would say, if I may, is that students as a transnational social class have common needs and common necessities. And the fact that we are talking about the transnationalization and globalization of activism and of politics leads us also to considering the global citizenship not only as a concept to education, to global citizenship, but as something which needs to have specific rights that should be recognized. Of course, the human rights, but also political rights in the fact of them being enforced, not just mere mouth work. So I would like to start with Samuel, actually. As we said, so global citizenship means also talking about a common set of rights. And one of these rights is at the educational level, is to see their learning achievements recognized wherever we go. For that, there is now the Global Recognition Convention by UNESCO. And now we are in the phase of the ratification of this treaty. So can you tell us more about this convention and the student campaign for its ratification?
Hello? Yes, all right. Thank you, Mateo. So I think since last year, 2020, student unions once again came together, and just like America has indicated, I think that the COVID, even though has been very brutal to all of us and has affected us in very different ways, I was told about one thing, that coming together in our numbers to fight for one cause is always worth it. So last year, we came together to look at understanding what the convention is and what impact it could possibly have on access to education, also look at cultural exchanges among others. And this convention by UNESCO largely is supposed to ensure that if let's say a student who studies in Cameroon should move to the UK or should move to Spain, his certificate should be able to be recognized without any biases in the UK, just as it was recognized in Canada. And I think that as we would all agree, this is very critical in ensuring that we are able to widen the access to higher education and also access to other job opportunities and also help with skill mobility. So with regards to the convention, student unions have currently produced a report which we intend to launch later, hopefully this year. And also as part of this, as part of the report that was written, another thing that we intend to do is to try to ask government, to ask heads of state to ratify the convention that making it possible for the convention to be applied globally, so that it becomes easier for students who are on the move, both voluntarily and involuntarily, to have their certificates and their skills duly recognized. So we do believe that this is an important and critical step for us that we intend to really explore how we could work together with both national, continental, local student unions to work on this application campaign, that when it is launched, everybody is all able to work hand in hand to ensure that we are able to make sense out of why it is important for heads of state to be able to ratify that convention.
Thank you very much, Samuel. Indeed, it's a very important topic on recognizing the learning achievements in different countries and giving and eliminated also those privileges in order to have. In many countries, we have this thing that in order if you want your learning achievement to be recognized, you need to pay thousands and thousands of euros, and this is not a matter of trust in recognition. Is a problem also of economic inequality, of who can afford that and who cannot. Another important and crucial topic about the global rights, of course, is gender justice and gender equality. And for what is about in our realm, or the realm of education, is the equal access to education and gender disparities. So, Zamzam, the unequal and unjust gender division of labor in household and care work, but also the structural imbalances that are present in our education systems have burdened girls and young women with more responsibilities and also more difficulties in many cases to access to education and to pursue and finish their studies. So global citizenship means gender equalities and gender justice. So what can education planners do to ensure that girls and young women are on equal footing with their education?
Thank you. I think first of all, understanding and recognizing and highlighting the essentially patriarchal systems in which our education systems exist in, and understanding that there is an imbalance and an unjust system that we operate around, and therefore you can't expect to implement a just education system in a system that is already set up to favor and disadvantage already young girls. And on top of that, as you highlighted, already societal imbalances and levels of injustice that exist outside of higher education before they've even made it to that framework. And therefore, it's understanding that there are different entry points for women, but also differently for women of color, and also and of course your socioeconomic background plays a pivotal part. And so actually it's just not about being a girl or a young woman, it's about actually the other intersecting identities that you hold that play a pivotal part in your educational experience. And so for me, and I think the work that we do at SU is understanding, first of all, those imbalances that exist and higher education institutions, ensuring that they recognize and work towards building frameworks that tackle, if anything, those imbalances and injustices that exist. An example that I can think of is Athena Swan, which is Athena Swan Charter is a framework which is used across the globe to support and transform gender equality within higher education and research. Athena Swan specifically focuses on STEM, which is courses such as mathematics, women in science, technology, engineering, medicine, courses that have often disproportionately had a low access for women. And what it actually does is that it ensures the entrance of women being allowed into those spaces, rather than it being so like there are reserved places and institutions and universities are held accountable if they're unable to recruit and support students, specifically women, through those courses. It recognises that there's a gender pay gap in accessing the labour market. It recognises that there is often a burden of finances for women in terms of caring responsibilities, etc., and that the support needs to be put in place. It recognises that academia itself, in the way in which we taught, our books are often taught by the books and the lectures in which we learn from are often from white old middle class men, and it recognises that. And I think it's a multi level approach to understanding and tackling a form of injustice that plays out in many different ways. So I think higher education institutions play, in fact, a pivotal part, because I truly believe higher education is a space in which we create future leaders and where we essentially create the hope that we have for tackling injustice that exists in our society. And higher educations therefore play a pivotal part in ensuring that our institutions are representative and are accessible by all students, regardless of their socioeconomic background or their sexual orientation or their gender. So that is I suppose my sense, without sort of going on too long. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zanzam. America, in concrete, these are the things that we should be doing and that we are also doing. How are student unions working to ensure what Zamzam was saying, was proposing now, and also, for instance, to end their gender-based violence?
Yes, well, I think I will extend it in terms of some of the actions being taken to what Zamzam brilliantly outlined, is that around decolonizing education, we have actually taken inspiration from the Latin Americans who talk about the depatriarchalization of society. And that has often been led by indigenous women's rights movements, saying that even decolonization needs to attack these patriarchal attitudes. And OBESU, the Organizing Bureau of European School Students Union, has set up working groups around decolonizing education, which has a specific regional focus in Europe, but again is asking those questions about male bias in the curriculum and how does the classroom create new forms of social organization for gender equality. OBESU is doing that, and in the GSF, we have that as part of our interest in the work of the Racial Justice Group. A second component is around the issue of gender-based violence. Sometimes we look at this issue as liability, as about risk to the university and what girls and women experience, right, in educational settings. We have taken up the idea that sexual violence or gender-based violence that happens on your way to school is a form of violence and is therefore a concern of our educational entity or institution. We need to extend our idea of gender-based violence as something where educational planners are only responsible when it happens on site, to really taking a whole society approach to say that when a young woman or a girl makes her way to school and she experienced sexual harassment in public transportation, that is a fundamental concern to the relevant Ministry of Education as well as the education planner. So this is the type of campaigns we have to lead to, yes, of course, address campus-based violence, but to understand that the violence in society, which impedes the ability of women and girls to learn, is seriously a problem. But then the last one that the GSF has done, we did it last year for International Women's Day, and not trying to make it just a celebratory event, but to really raise the call for feminist leadership in student governments. We as student movements need to not just encourage women's leadership, but to institutionalize practices which has feminist leadership for women or persons who identify as women, but as well as a transformative idea of masculinities, where we could see men not just as this ally to what women want to do, but see themselves as comrades in the struggle for gender justice. That I think requires a little bit more political and concrete work, but I do hope that our work that we did since last year can be taken in good faith, and that this year we could really continue to have a dialogue and getting more feminist leadership in our student organizations.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Emilka. I have a question to Khalel. So we're talking about global rights, and of course, academic freedom is part of that, but also freedom to express their political views and even dissent, especially in democracies. And the school and students' organizations need to enjoy those rights. So how would you describe the freedom to express political views and dissent of student organizations in your region?
Kalel, a segunda pergunta, por favor.
Vocês estão me ouvindo?
Sim.
Então, a gente vive um processo muito delicado, né, de perseguição política aos setores educacionais e juventudes organizadas. Mesmo com muitas adversidades, a gente continua o nosso trabalho, né, de levar a defesa da educação, democracia e soberania dos nossos países da América Latina. Mas uma preocupação é a ascensão da extrema-direita no continente, né, que fez com que os estudantes e o setor educacional tivessem muito retrocesso na construção da democracia e do avanço educacional. Terminei, Bianca.
So Khalel said that here we live in a very delicate process of political persecution of educational sectors and organized youth. But despite many adversities, we continue our work to defend the education, democracy, and sovereignty of our countries in Latin America. The rise of the extreme right on the continent has meant that students and the education sector in general have had many setbacks in building democracy and educational development. And when we go on the street and fight for education, we are used to suffer a lot of political and policial repression. And this is very common in a lot of countries on the region, but mainly in Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and Chile, where students even lost their eyes because the government, the extreme right government, is simply trying to shut us down and not letting us having a voice. So it is a very complicated scenario for us, but students keep fighting, even knowing that we can pay a high cost for it.
Thank you very much, Khalel, and thank you very much, Bianca. For sure, the issue of political repression and brutality is unfortunately more and more widespread in the world. We see that in Latin America, we see that in Europe, in Belarus, we have seen that in Asia, we have seen that in Thailand, and we've seen also violences in Eswatini, in Africa. So unfortunately, as we were saying, the struggles are global, and the academic freedom and the freedom of dissent and democratic participation is one of the crises that we are experiencing together with the climate crisis, together with the health crisis and the economic injustice crisis. This leads to our last topic, which are the crises that we are facing. And as students, we are also members of society, and we do not live in any ivory tower. Especially our organizations are involved in many social issues. So I would start with Zamzam. Zamzam Esu represents one of the richest parts of the world, and so also one of those parts of the world where the duty to intervene is against the climate crisis that has been done most, historically speaking, most by Europe and North America has. So what are the responsibilities of rich nation to ensure that we have a sustainable and ecological future, and that we don't die due to the rising sea levels, drought, and whatever you can think of with the climate crisis?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We are Europe in one of the most richest and the most advanced when it comes to the climate crisis and the impacts of the climate crisis. And I think, in fact, a quote from David Orr comes to mind, that we're not all in the same boat, but we all are caught in the same storm. And the saying is, some of us are in super yachts while some of us only have an oar. And the reality is that the impacts of the climate disaster isn't something that is impending or is about to happen. It is a lived reality that is happening and has been happening, and destroying countries and communities and lands and causing mass migration of to evacuate land. So actually the impacts of the climate disaster has been felt by the global south, by predominantly countries who have been the countries who have had the least impact and the least to contribute to the crisis that we find ourselves in, but actually are the ones who are impacted the most. And this is something that we've heard probably a million times, right? In the sense that, like, all of us know as educated young people that the effects of the climate disaster is actually predominantly caused by the rich nations. And for that reason, we play a very pivotal part in ensuring that the ecological crisis is averted, right? We play a pivotal part in ensuring that we meet the targets that are set to be able to avert the disaster. I think as young people, we play even more pivotal part in ensuring and lobbying and putting pressure where pressure is needed. Student movement has a long history of fighting injustices in no matter way it plays out and how it plays out. And I often say it's because we have the least to lose but the most to gain when it comes to student activism and raising issues. And this is quite literally a fight for our future. And so therefore the ecological crisis, specifically us as ISU, as a European body who our institutions are really play a pivotal part in averting the climate disaster, have an even bigger place apart for if we truly believe in global solidarity, and we truly and we do, then we have to understand that we can't allow the world's richest to continue to get richer and the world's poorest to suffer, and the effects of us continuously driving the mass consumption of fossil fuels, of unnecessary carbon. So I think to summate, I think in reality, of course, we play a very pivotal part in averting the climate disaster, and I think there is a huge role for us to play as student bodies directly to lobby, to mass mobilize, to organize and to put pressure where needs be, and to work together to continue to tell those stories and to show the impact of the climate emergency on a wider scale, but also on the impacts that it will have on the wider role that we need to play in ensuring the current disasters that have occurred because of the climate emergency is tackled by and paid for by the nations that have caused it. So that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would ask Samuel to, since he also has to leave very soon. The question, the important question about financing of education and how it is important to tackle the issue of debt forgiveness, because many countries in the global south are raising their demands for debt forgiveness, and increasing public debts undermines accountability, as we have said, to fund basic needs, including education. So what does reparatory justice in terms of G20 commitments look like for you?
Sure. So I think already, even for colonized countries, I mean, they have deficit years of development already, and that perhaps there are also other equally pressing needs to take care of, including like building roads, building hospitals, building other social amenities that was required to, achieve a certain level of development. And equally, they would have to also ensure that their citizens are well educated, well skilled to be able to also push the agenda for national development. And
seems we lost the connection. Yeah, we're having a bit of technical problems, it seems. Maybe Samuel will join us. Will rejoin. Even if he had to go to meet the Malawian president. So quite important thing. I would like to ask Amilcar. So we have talked about the climate crisis. We're talking about debt forgiveness, and we are talking about all of this. So, what is the importance that global? Maybe somebody is back. Samuel, can you hear us? Sorry for the audience for this. I know Samuel can hear us. I will go through your question, Mika. So, what is the role that the students organized at the global level can do to lead these campaigns, and also for what you were saying in creating the grassroots development of that? Samuel, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Sorry,
yes. Continue. No problem.
Okay, all right. Apologies for that internet. So, as I was saying. Already colonized countries have had already deficit years, and development, which means moving. They would obviously require more assistance than the colonizers, I should say, or perhaps the developed countries, and that putting extra burden on such countries would only mean that would want them to remain in the position that they are as it stands. And perhaps, for me, reparatory justice is not sort of a gift or some form of charity to such countries, but it would mean that it's sort of ensuring that countries, such countries, are treated fairly if we truly intend to create a more equal and just world. So perhaps maybe as we talk about this, I would also want to indicate that the G20 countries would obviously, or the G20 members would obviously have a more daunting task to, support such countries to at least alleviate some of the debts that is on their heads.
Thank you very much. It's very important to, as I said, that reparatory justice is justice, not it cannot be charity, and this is a very important message. If we're going to Amilcar, in order also to give Amilcar the whole overview of all the topics that we are discussing in this final round, I would like to ask Kalel now about the economic justice. So we're talking about climate justice. We're talking about justice between global north and global south relations, but we also have the economic injustice also within our societies, and this has been highlighted by the emergency learning that has been deployed by the pandemic, which has highlighted the disparities and injustice within our communities in terms of digital divide, economic inequalities, but it's also casting a shadow on the role that technologies and technology providers might play in the post-pandemic education. So, Kalel, in your perspective, what kind of investment should be made in order to ensure fair access to digital education while avoiding at the same time political dependency from big IT providers?
Só segundo.
Yes, we can hear you.
Vocês estão me ouvindo? Oi.
Sim.
Então, durante a pandemia, a gente viu o agravamento das injustiças sociais e o papel destacado dos meios digitais, seja na iniciativa das escolas e universidades em tentar manter o calendário escolar em dia com aplicativos de videoconferência como o Zoom, Google Meet, entre outros. Por um lado, foi muito importante e apresentou com facilidade de uso outra forma de conexão das pessoas distantes por conta do isolamento, mas ao mesmo tempo apresentou um grande vácuo. Vários países ainda possuem uma conectividade frágil e uma grande parcela da população que não tem acesso aos hardwares necessários para utilizar os sistemas, principalmente nos locais mais afastados das capitais, agravando a exclusão digital que assola o continente americano. No Brasil, escrevemos junto ao Parlamento Brasileiro um projeto de lei que visa a garantia da internet para 18 milhões de estudantes e professores de forma 100% gratuita. Aprovamos e conseguimos derrotar o governo Bolsonaro, que tentou de todas as formas derrubar o projeto. A inclusão digital foi e será muito importante no pós-pandemia, para conectar estudantes dos locais mais afastados que não possuem outras formas de acesso à educação. Mas da mesma forma que a inclusão digital é importante, também se faz necessário debater e então formular sobre a regulação necessária para garantir a liberdade de expressão e a privacidade do usuário, bem como a saúde mental dos estudantes que farão parte da comunidade que utiliza a rede. Precisamos traçar caminhos para não adoecer uma geração muito conectada desde a primeira infância. São temas importantes que precisam sempre estar no centro do debate. E o avanço da tecnologia é necessário e benéfico, porém precisa ser feito com responsabilidade.
So for the interpretation, during the pandemic, we saw the aggravation of social injustice and the prominent role of digital media, whether in the initiative of schools and universities in trying to keep the school calendar up to date with video conferencing applications such as Zoom, Google Meet, among others. On the other hand, it was very important and present as tools that are easy to use, another way to connecting people that were distant due to social isolation. But at the same time, it also represented big problems. Several countries still have fragile connectivity, and a large portion of the population does not have access to the necessary hardware to use the systems, especially in places farther away from capitals, aggravating the digital exclusion that plagues the American continent. In Brazil, we wrote with the Brazilian Parliament a law project that aims to guarantee the internet for 80 million students and teachers for free, and it was approved, and we managed to defeat Bolsonaro government that tried in every way to reject it. Digital inclusion was and will be very important in the post-pandemic world to connect students from the most remote places that do not have access to other forms of education. Just as digital inclusion is important, it is also necessary to debate and then formulate its necessary regulation, guarantee the freedom of expression and privacy of the user, as well as the mental health of students who will be part of the community that use this network. We need to trace paths so that a generation that is very connected since early childhood won't get sick. These are important issues that must always be at the center of the debate. The advancement of technology is necessary and beneficial, but it needs to be done with responsibility to avoid creating more inequality and injustice.
Thank you very much, Kallela. Thank you very much, Bianca. Also, I think that like the Facebook down, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp down of the of yesterday also makes us more, let's say, aware than ever of the issue of monopolism, the big tech companies, and also the increasing role that these IT companies, but not only these big giants these big corporations are playing as a role in our global society. So coming back to the question for Milka, as we have said, we have talked about climate crisis and climate justice. We have talked about global justice in the sense of the relation between the global north and global south. We are talking about the regulations to the IT providers and corporations, as well as the importance to tackle digital divide, both within countries, but also between countries in the terms of access to quality internet connection, also as a human right. So, as we were saying before, the Global Student Forum aims to develop the capacity building for the students globally, also in those territories where there is not one yet. So, my question is, what is the role that a global student movement can have in support all these struggles at the global as well as local level? They are all links of the same chain.
Sure, and I mean, to be clear, once upon a time, I would send an email out to the National Students' Union of the UK and hope that they would reply, because I come from a little island, and in the Commonwealth framework, England is like the big country that have a long history of student unions, and that's the one we'll read about on the BBC. So it's quite interesting, like how digital technology really created an opportunity for us to reach out to people. I come from a very small country, 1.3 million persons, and for a long while I thought that was a very big place because there are islands that have 250,000 persons as well. So to imagine societies where there are no universities, imagine societies where there are 25 secondary schools, and these are countries in the world. So it's important that any global structure, not just the GSF, amplifies the voices and perspectives of people from such territories. But at the same time, that we need to see ourselves as part of global discussions. One of the things that also surprised me was how much students could potentially play a role, and sometimes were accommodated to do so, in groups like the UNESCO, in groups like the European Union, and in Africa, the African Union as well. So it is important for us to see ourselves as also learn the types of strategies and mechanisms. It's not that we want to worship one society over the other, but each one has a particular strength. Some people are very strong with movement-based organizations, and that is not a form of condescension. In Latin America, they make political demands, as we just heard from Kalel, which could deliver concrete policy results at the national level. And we do know sometimes we are so institutionalized at the regional and the global one, we are sometimes divorced from the national deliverables that could reach into people's hearts, minds, and their hands. So there's a certain type of dialectic, I think, happens with us in the global student movement. And we, I think, play a very transformational role in ensuring that we have global representation for students in global decision-making bodies. We could say all we want, but Brussels, countries like Italy, France, and Germany would play a role in making decisions about what is going to happen for the rest of the world, if not where the resources go. To have students there, to have allies, but also to have a structure to represent those voices and views in these what may appear to be Euro-American structures, but they come to represent the global, becomes very important. So I hope that we could continue to promote the message of AGSF, but also to see ourselves as being part of a global conversation that is unsexy work, but is the work we have to do.
Thank you very much, Amilcar. As a final note to this wonderful panel, it is important that the institutions, that the international and global system that we have, the UN system, that has like a very specific historical roots. So the winners of the World War II, very plainly, and all the other intergovernmental institutions that and fora that happened afterwards. One of these is G20. Are used as a way to actually enforce prosperity and enforce justice. Of course, it is not simple, because there are structural inequalities in the global global supply chain, in the global division of labor. But this is why it is important to have organizations like ours, I would say, now finishing. So organizations that are grassroots based, that have a touch upon reality of the common student, and that from that point onwards, they can go up until the United Nations General Assembly, without losing the capacity on the side, and with the possibility to mobilize the unions, to mobilize the people from the different parts of the globe. Once we will have achieved this kind of integration of the movement structures and of the organizations, not only for students, but I think of the labor movements, of the workers' movement, or many others oppressed categories at the global level, we probably are going to see also transformational politics. And we think that, and we hope that this kind of fora like this today, and like the participation that we had in this year with Civil 20 will provide us, and will provide who will come after us with a platform discussion in order to force and to create this kind of reasonings. The question on the impact of the engagement groups towards the G20 declaration is questionable. But the question is to use also this kind of fora in order to do extra, let's say, G20 work. And I think that for what matters, being here and be able to talk to this audience and be recognized as a student caucus also within the C20 is first step in the good direction. I would like to close the panel here. Thank our audience, and thank Zamzam, Amilcar, Samuel, Kal, and Bianca for the interpretation too, and the technical assistants that have used us, and leave you free for 25 minutes before the start of a new meeting. Thank you very much. Have a good day.